Welcome back, everyone. We are so excited to be on this continuing journey through the relentless courage of a scared child. And this week, everything changes. Tana meets me and then tortures me for about the first 18 months of our relationship. And, you know, we have so many great reviews. There's reviews from Australia and from London. But I want to read a review that is actually one of our winners. So Susan from Denver, this podcast is full of insightful wisdom for a variety of aspects that you may not connect to brain health. So refreshing to know they're looking into new ways to diagnose and treat various brain issues.
Awesome, Susan.
Love it.
So Susan gets either The End of Mental Illness or my new book. We'll sign those. So you can have the Relentless Courage of a Scared Child, or you can have the cookbook, your choice. So let us know.
Well, we're always grateful. And whatever you learn, if you write it down, take a picture of it, post it on any of your social media sites, and then leave us a review at brainwarriorswaypodcast.com. We'll enter you into a drawing to win one of our books. We are so grateful. So the year is 2005. At the end of 2005, we meet each other.
Right.
Online.
Well, we left off with sort of a cliffhanger of a story, and life was a little crazy. So we're not going to go into all of that. Lots happens in the book between the Playboy cancer story and me meeting you. And it's not all good. Some of it's very good, but there's a lot of ups and downs during that time. And then I meet you. Yes.
And then you meet me. And our first formal date was January 1st, 2006. We sort of think of that as our anniversary. And we actually forget our real anniversary.
It's terrible. We both forget our real anniversary.
A lot.
I mean, January 1st is easy to remember.
So we remember that. And so 15 years ago.
Yeah. I totally didn't trust you.
And I was like really excited.
Yeah, I almost canceled my first date.
To meet you. I'd been divorced 6 years and had a couple of relationships that, you know, were fine, but they weren't awesome. And then I meet you and you are beautiful. You're smart. You're funny. My heart goes pitter patter, and then you keep pushing me away.
Well, you kept trying to marry me. I didn't
ask you to marry me.
You did pretty quick. You were pretty serious pretty quick. And it just, you were so nice and I didn't trust it. It's like, I kept waiting for the other shoe to fall. There's no way I trusted that you were that nice. Now,
I should have been way more anxious than I was.
Yeah.
About you.
So. I tried to tell you. I was helping you. I tried to tell you I am doing you a favor. Did I not? You
did. And you were wrong. Because ultimately being married to you is the best decision I've made.
Aww.
So, you know, I sort of had a sense that you were the one. And then you kept going away. But, you know, there are a couple of really pivotal parts.
Yeah.
After we met, because this is just how I am, I scanned you. Like 2.5 weeks later, I'm like, you haven't seen the clinic. Don't you want to see the clinic?
And I'm like, and you want to see my naked brain. I did give you credit for most original line. Yeah. I'd heard a lot of lines, and that one was very original.
And during our first date, I sort of thought you had ADD.
I did not have ADD.
You totally had ADD your whole life. Your mother has ADD from hell.
And I thought ADD was total nonsense, an excuse to fail, but not try.
And when I sort of just ask questions.
You're like, oh, but you drink 2 pots of coffee every day. And in your words, you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do a hard 2-hour workout so you can quote unquote clear the cobwebs. And I'm like, yeah, so. And you work in a trauma unit where it's like the most intense unit in the hospital.
And a lot of trauma doctors are ADD because they just thrive on the dopamine hit. And so when I scanned you, showed, yes, indeed, you did have a little bit, but then your brain had been hurt.
Yeah, which I also
And-
thought was crazy.
But I'm like, well, have you ever had a brain injury? Now she works on a neurosurgical ICU unit, so she thinks you have to have like
That
a
means
broken
like,
skull.
yeah, you cracked your skull open, you've got
Except
a brain in your brain,
when I asked
you're in a
her,
coma.
and she said no. And then I asked her again, and she said, well, I was 25 and my sister fell asleep at the wheel and we were going 75 miles an hour and she fell asleep and the car flipped 3 times. And the roof
almost got
of
hit
the
by a
car was smashed in.
Yeah.
And you lived only because you were reclined.
I was reclined, yeah. And I walked away. So I guess I was just so grateful that I walked away from it. I mean, I remember being jostled back and forth. But I think I hit
But
my
if you
head
just
on the,
think of your brain is soft, your skull is hard, your skull has sharp bony ridges, those forces
Yeah.
as your brain spinning.
well,
and
it
then
makes
stopping.
sense. I mean, as a nurse, I'm like, we arrest people for shaken baby syndrome, right? So, for a reason, but but up until then, that never made sense to me because I'm thinking brain injury means you're in a coma. So, those types of things. So,
And you were not. And I could see evidence on.
yeah, I
the
could see a
scan.
little dent. I'm like, what the heck is that?
Yeah. And sometimes that can go with mood instability or irritability. Not that anyone would ever notice that.
As long as I'm not in line. I can't be in line. I hate being in line. And I don't like when construction is late on my house.
But even despite that, you had a beautiful brain. And one of the first things I said is, I hope they didn't put you on Prozac.
Yeah. And I literally, my jaw hit the top. I'm like, why? And he said, because he's like, there are probably medications that would have helped you, but that wouldn't be one I would suspect did. He said, you said you were depressed. Did they put you on Prozac? And I'm like, they did. And it almost ruined my life. And I did some crazy stuff on Prozac. And so, I'm just lucky that whether it was the grace of God or I still had some, semblance of control left enough to just like not totally ruin my life, but it could have ruined my life. And so you're like, and I'm like, why would you not put me on Prozac? And then you sort of show me my brain scan. You're like, this part of your brain is sleepy, your frontal lobes. And what Prozac does is it increases serotonin. It's a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So it increases the available serotonin, which drops your frontal lobes, but yours are already sleepy. So if you put someone on something that drops their frontal lobes and their frontal lobes are already sleepy, that increases impulsivity and it affects their judgment. And it's the executive center of their brain. And I'm like, ding, 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 ding. Like my whole life made sense. Like that whole period of time where I was like, why do I just keep doing stupid things and I don't care? Like the weird part was it wasn't doing stupid things wasn't even the craziest part. It was the not caring because that's not like me. I'm an anxious person. Like, me, I'm a very anxious person.
Yes.
So it did not
for the end of the world.
I prepare for everything. Like in school, I was like, everything had to be turned in way early. So all of a sudden I just didn't care. And for that, and what went off Prozac, it went away. And so I was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. And I remember thinking that psychiatrist that put me on that, and he had doubled my dose when I complained that I didn't feel right. Like he should have been arrested for not actually like paying attention.
Taught not to look.
Okay, well, he shouldn't have been taught that. I'm sorry, I'm a patient.
So
From a patient's perspective,
judgmental dragon
yes,
roaring in his head again.
Absolutely, when it ruins your life, yes, I get to say that. Yes, I do. Anybody out there feel this way? Anybody else out there experience this? Please leave a comment. I want to know because I know I'm not the only one.
You are not.
Yes.
So lots of insights. And another thing you told me was since the age of 4, you had upper and lower GIs. And I'm like, well, what happened at 4? And nothing.
My standard response was nothing. Everything was fine.
And then I learned your uncle was
yeah,
murdered
you're like
in a
really
drug deal.
sneaky. Like you're super sneaky.
Oh
okay.
no, I have a book.
Yeah, don't date a shrink.
Called The Brain in Love that I actually wrote when we were dating. The Brain in Love, and there's chapter 6. It's called Seeing the Dead Animals Around the Oasis of Love. It's actually, if you're dating.
And you didn't run when you met me?
It's actually, when you're dating, how to screen people for brain health, emotional health issues. Are they going to be a good partner or not? Well, for me, I have this rescue thing, which you hate because,
I hate because I don't think of myself as, and I don't think of
people.
myself as a victim either. So
you're not a victim.
Yeah.
But I thought
that's why I kept pushing,
because I cared about you, that I could be helpful to you. And so when I learned really the stories in the Relentless Courage,
like I said, you're
child,
sneaky about getting information.
that with help, you could just be even more amazing than I already thought you were. And one of my first gifts to you was EMDR.
Well, but let's go back to the story, because you're like, what happened at 4? Like you were having upper and lower GIs. That doesn't make sense. And then you found out that, my uncle was murdered and there was other stuff going on. And my dad was coming and going and doing drugs and, whatever. There was a lot of stuff that was, and that's how I said it to you. I'm like, yeah, but it was just like, what happens to everybody, right? It's like garden variety dysfunctional. And so, and you're like, and you had that look right there. And you're like, no, that's not like, no. You're like, so 2 weeks after this incident where your uncle was murdered and there's screaming and chaos and, craziness in your house and you get pushed away and you feel sort of rejected, you start having these GI issues. And I was sick all the time. I mean, I was always on antibiotics.
Well, and most people don't know serotonin that helps you feel normal is wildly important to your gut. And it gives you a sense of safety that you can eat these foods or you can digest these foods. So think serotonin and safety. And you had no safety at the time.
No, I did not.
You had no safety. So when we come back, we're going to talk about how important trauma therapy is to being well. Did you learn anything besides don't marry a psychiatrist? Write it down. Post it on any of your social media sites. Leave us a comment, question, or a review at brainwarriorswaypodcast.com. Stay with us. Hi, I'm Dr. Daniel Amen. In the end of mental illness, I talk about, well, what if we reimagine mental health as brain health? And this one idea changes everything.
Welcome back. We are still talking about my journey and when I met you and how things changed and my reluctance at dating a psychiatrist. So we're talking about the relentless courage of a scared child. So yeah, things changed when I met you.
Yeah. Now pay attention to the lessons. There's a lot of lessons and we just dearly love it if you write it down, post it on any of your social media sites, hashtag Brain Warriors Way podcast.
And that's one of the reasons I wrote this, right? I wrote this because there's no reason for me to just have people like voyeuristically looking into my life. I wrote this because the lessons and the things that people write to me. So I really want, and the comments I've been getting recently with some of the stuff we've been talking about have been sort of mind blowing. So I know there's a lot of people suffering. And I think when we open up this part of ourselves, it's really scary, but all of a sudden you just don't feel alone. The stories I've been getting, the messages I've been getting have been really, really powerful. So I really do love getting those from you. Please keep sending them. And that is the reason that we're talking about all this. So let me know if it resonates. So knowing about this trauma, I'm thinking to myself, I hated when you used the word trauma. Do you remember that? I got so angry. I'm like, I am not traumatized. But you could see it on my scan.
I could.
You showed me the trauma pattern in my skin, the PTSD pattern. I'm like, what? No, I don't have trauma. Like, I'm not trauma. No.
Yeah, no. Denial is a very important defense mechanism.
Right.
And you were in denial. Yet you had just come out of a pretty traumatic marriage that was not good.
A little bit.
And you hadn't been settled.
No.
And you had a baby that Chloe was just turned 2 after we had met.
Yeah.
And I adored her. She had 12-word sentences. I mean, she's just a little chatterbox. She still is. And so, you know, no matter who is in my life, I always just want them to be better. So you can go, you have a rescue complex. And I'm like,
So
that's
what?
why I get a sense of significance.
Right.
Of
So what?
being helpful. It's why we do this. I like being helpful. And for whatever reason, my oxytocin level went way up when I was with you. It just made me happy. And so a couple of important things. I took you to meet my friend Byron Katie.
Yeah.
Who
that was mind bending.
I had read her book, Loving What Is. So right before I had met you, I'd dated someone for 3 years. And when she went away, it just broke my heart. I mean, I was just not normal. It's really the first time in my life, except losing my grandfather, I felt grief. I mean, it's just super off and sad. And then she and I are published by this same imprint at Random House. And I read her book, and then I got to meet her, and then I got to treat half the people in her family. That's sort of how it goes with me. And I fell in love with her work, and I still teach it all the time.
Me too.
And I had an opportunity to go visit her. And so you and I went and visited her.
I had no idea
together.
what I was in for. I had no idea what I was in for.
And what did you learn?
So first of all, I thought that I was really good at having my wall, my facade intact. I was really good at it. And most people thought I had it pretty, even you thought I had it pretty together. I mean, yeah, you're a shrink and you would get little pieces out of me, but you still thought I had my life pretty together for the most part. I mean, I had a good job, I owned my house and, didn't have a lot of bills. And on the outside,
There's
it looked
so
like
much attractive about you, from how smart you are, how empathic you are. To be a neurosurgical ICU nurse, you can take care of the sickest people. So kind, competent, beautiful. I mean, we went through the whole Playboy thing. So, yeah, I mean, I was completely taken, but thought maybe with a few adjustments.
But you kept seeing this trauma. But even you
I
at
kept
first,
seeing the
you kept
trauma
mentioning this trauma, and I was so irritated, and it irritated me. But what even you didn't know at first was that I had never really addressed that I had suffered with an eating disorder secretly. So from the time I was 17 years old, when my mom took me to UCLA Eating Disorders Clinic, and they freaked me out so badly that I left. And I'm like, I did not come here to get labeled and see people die. I mean, someone went into a code blue while I was there, a 17-year-old, because she went into heart failure, or no, cardiac arrest. And it freaked me out so badly that I never went back and got treated. And so I just would exercise as hard as I could to manage my anxiety. But every now and then it would peek its head when I got cancer and I couldn't exercise, or when I went through my divorce and I was working like crazy hours and trying to take care of a baby, and just life was just overwhelming. And then it popped its head up. And I felt like such a failure, but I couldn't let anyone see that. And so I didn't even tell you, and I couldn't say the word. So I couldn't say certain words like molested. I couldn't say, I could say it in the context of other people, but not me. I couldn't say the B word. And so I remember when I met Byron Katie, and one of the first things she asked me was how long I'd suffered with an eating disorder. And I'm like, or she said disordered eating or something. I don't remember exactly what she said, but I'm like, what? I was stunned. And I had finally just told you, like on the drive up there. I don't know why, something to prompt me. And I looked at you.
It was in the hotel room.
And I was so angry at you because I thought you told her. And you're like, I didn't say anything. I just learned myself. I just found out myself. And so I was like so mad because I prided myself on no one knowing anything. And everything began to crumble from that moment. It just like a house of cards. It just began to one by one, just break down. Yeah. So I write the story in the book, and it's a pretty powerful story about how she turned that thought around, with the, is it true? Can you know it's true? How do you feel when you have that thought? Who would you be without that thought? And then we turn it to its opposite. And it's a really powerful lesson.
Well, and then I took you to a 3-day workshop
Oh,
by Katie up at Esalen.
yeah.
And there's this very powerful exercise where she has you write down your thoughts about your body.
Yeah.
And what you discovered was, and you're like in a size 0 jeans, and that your thoughts were virtually identical
To every woman in there. Didn't matter what they looked like, didn't matter what size they were, how old they were. It was mind-boggling. They all had the exact same thoughts.
And you actually tell the story in the book of a woman who stands up and reads her list, and it's the same as your list. But she's like
much older than I am,
and overweight. And
I'm like, I was so mind-boggling.
And then you got up and was just like shocked me in front of all those people. There were like hundreds of people there. And you commented on her thoughts.
And I commented on mine because she had said something about sort of women like me. And I was like, oh, hold up right now.
And then afterwards, you told someone else you struggled with an eating disorder. And I'm looking at you like, you actually said that?
I said it out loud, yeah.
You said it out loud. Yeah. And in so many ways, it was freeing.
Well, it opened up the door. I knew that wasn't it. I wasn't done. That was the beginning. All of a sudden, I felt ready to go to therapy. I felt ready you had given me a gift of 10 sessions of EMDR. And at first I was like, why would you give me a gift of therapy?
I want to talk about that in the next one, because it's such an important treatment tool for trauma. But
only a shrink would give you.
But in
therapy as a gift.
But in Esalen, you really got to dive deeply into these 5 questions.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You are not your mind. In fact, I'm going to give you, as a bonus for staying with us, a new exercise that I learned from our friend Stephen Hayes. You're going to meet him soon. Is give your mind a name. That way you can separate from your mind. And the name I've given my mind is Hermie. So Hermie was my pet raccoon when I was 16, and I loved her. I actually didn't know it was a her until she had babies. But Hermie used to talk all the time.
Yes,
all the time. And she never said anything, at least anything that I understood. That made sense. And now that I've named my mind Hermie, that I get to choose if I listen to it or I don't listen to it. And what Katie really teaches is you don't have to believe every stupid thing you think.
Right.
Is it helping or is it hurting? You should carry these 3 words around with you all the time. Is it true? That just because you have a thought has nothing to do with whether or not it's true. And then you actually ended up taking her 9-day course.
I did.
To really get in the deep end
of
the pool of managing your mind, and that you don't have to believe everything you think. All right. So when we come back, we're going to talk about your experience with EMDR. You had a masterful therapist, and it was hard. Yeah. And initially, some of the feelings you had, like about your mom, it turned from, oh, we have this great relationship, to not so much, and which then came full circle. So anyways, stay with us. If you learned anything, like give your mind a name, write it down, post it on any of your social media sites, leave us a comment, question, or review at brainwarriorswaypodcast.com. Welcome back. I'm here with my beautiful wife, and we're talking about her new book, The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child. I am so proud of her. And in this session, we're going to talk about trauma and a specific treatment for trauma called EMDR.
But before we do, I want to read a review. 3 Wily Girls. This podcast was the first podcast I started listening to, and it's changed my life and my family. My husband had severe acid reflux and allergies. He no longer has to take medicine. Wow. My 2 girls, 13 and 14, are now eating healthy food as a choice, not because they have to. I'm a middle-aged woman with midlife issues, and I'm happy to report I run circles around women half my age. I love that. I've also learned how to love my brain, which in turn taught me how to love myself. When mama's happy, the whole family's happy. Isn't that true?
It's so true, at least in my house.
So thank you so much for that. You get either the end of mental illness or the Relentless Courage of a Scared Child, or you can have the cookbook, The Brain Warriors.
Well, and we have to make sure we tell people that we have an event.
Oh, that's right.
December 12th. And you can sign up for the event at tanamen.com/event. You can also pre-order the book. And if you do, you get all sorts of gifts at relentlesscourage.com. So if you pre-order
it's
the
over
book
$400
anywhere,
worth of gifts.
you get a lot of great free things.
But if you go to Amazon or somewhere else, you need to then go to my site and show me the receipt, and then we'll give you the gifts. If you go to relentlesscourage.com, you can just download them. Yeah. Or you can go to relentlesscourage.com and actually enter your receipt number.
Yeah. So trauma, sort of the whole book is trauma.
It's overcoming trauma.
But overcoming trauma. So one of my gifts to you. So I studied EMDR, and I first learned about it around 1995. And I had an EMDR trainer who worked with us in our Northern California clinic, our first clinic. Her name was Jennifer Lendl, and I just loved her. And 1996, I get investigated by the California Medical Board because I'm doing imaging. And it's like, you shouldn't be doing things outside the standard of care. So for a whole year, I got investigated, and I wasn't sleeping. I was anxious. I was traumatized. And I went and did one session with you because she saw I was really upset. And she's like, come here. We did one session. That one was like 30 minutes. And I never felt anxious about the investigation again. We won the investigation. Nothing bad happened. I became an expert for the California Medical Board after that. And I'm like, wow, this is so powerful that could take a ongoing traumatizing event and make me not care about it. Now, I still did all the things I needed to do to win the investigation, but
you didn't feel.
I was impressed.
Yeah.
By how much that helped me. And then I did a study on EMDR on police officers who were involved in shootings, and all of them went back to work. They were all off work, and it changed their brain. And so when I'm listening about the murder of your uncle, the near drowning, the molestation, the date rape,
being attacked when I was 15,
cancer,
it just reads like a horror film.
I'm like, I think this will help you. So I actually paid for 10 sessions of EMDR. You saw a wonderful.
She was fantastic.
EMDR therapist.
Yeah.
So what was it like for you?
So initially I was reluctant because I'm like, I am not going to go in and, have some shrink, like have me bang my head against a wall talking about my problems for 3 years and telling me how screwed up my mom is. I'm not doing it. So I was very reluctant. I didn't really understand what EMDR was. I wasn't into psychobabble. I'm like, I didn't like walkie-talkies when I was working. I wanted them intubated and sedated. Like, make no mistake about it, I didn't want to talk about problems. So that was me.
How did we get together?
I know, right? I almost canceled my first date with you. But that's how I had survived. I had survived by not being a victim, by not talking about it as a problem. That doesn't mean I was thriving. It just means I was surviving. And so, but I finally, after the Byron Katie event, I went maybe there's a chance that life is better than this. I mean, it just opened up that possibility. Maybe there's a chance that life is better than this, that I don't have to hide so much and I don't have to pretend so much. And so it's like, the fake it till you make it. I thought that was normal. And so I remember going in and I thought, well, I'll go try it once. If I don't like it, I don't have to go back. And I went and she was so cool. Number one, my therapist was so cool. Like I loved her. She just completely was like identified with me. She was really good at gaining rapport. So I really loved her. She herself actively had cancer. So I just really loved her. But I didn't realize EMDR is sort of like, it's not really a shortcut. I don't want to call it a shortcut. It's not a shortcut, but you don't need to go on and on and on and on for a long period of time. You sort of quickly cut to the chase with EMDR. You get to the core of the trauma really quickly. And I still wasn't even sure how I felt about this word trauma. But she'd ask certain questions and then she does the eye movement thing, which I'm like, how the hell is this going to work?
So you could learn more about EMDR at emdria.org, EMDR International Association.org.
Yeah.
And I write about it in a number of my books, and it's just so
but
powerful.
No one is more skeptical than I am about stuff like this. So I'm like very skeptical. But Psychobabble, right?
Which you now promote all the time.
Because it works. So she's doing this eye thing, and all of a sudden these weird random thoughts are popping up in my head. And I'm like, she's like, so, like, how do you feel about this now? And I'm like, I don't know. Weird thoughts are coming to my head. She's like, nothing is random. So tell me what it is. So all of a sudden it's like this sweater unraveling. And I'm like, things I thought that were normal when I was growing up, all of a sudden I'm like, I don't even know how to explain it. They began to connect. It's like putting a puzzle together. But then you can see the whole picture and it no longer sort of doesn't make sense. Does that make sense? Like all of a sudden the whole picture just comes together and you're like, oh, like it doesn't, like it's not this like weird random puzzle pieces anymore. And so
your behaviors begin to make sense. And the eye movement actually is calming the limbic or emotional structures in your brain. And so you begin to take away the emotional charge of those earlier
But I
events.
will say this, it did take, like, what happened for me was, I don't know if this happens for everybody. And maybe it's because I had a number of traumatic events, even though that was hard for me to like
hundreds of them.
I don't know about hundreds, but
no, when you grow up with screaming and gunshots and people breaking into the house and your mom not coming home night after night after night, there are hundreds, maybe thousands.
But I think I survived
kinds of events.
But I survived, and I know people watching. I know because I'm getting the messages. I keep hearing, my life was your life. So I know that there's a lot of people who go through that, and I started telling myself it was normal. I started telling myself that was normal. So when I started to all of a sudden realize, oh wait, maybe that wasn't so normal. That was hard. And that's when, rather than getting better right away, it was like, I almost had to like acknowledge that it wasn't normal, do a little bit of backtracking. It got worse before it got better. And I started unraveling all of those events almost one by one, if that makes sense. And so I found myself feeling angry before I felt better. Like, people that I thought that I was close to, I'm like, that wasn't normal. That wasn't okay what happened. Like, I found myself getting kind of angry. Like the child that should have reacted that way, that didn't, that couldn't, all of a sudden was angry. And then I came full circle and I was able to let it go. So for me, I don't know if that's normal for everybody.
It's very normal. And your mom, who, when you and I first met, you had idolized,
because she was tough.
That took a dip.
It did. It took a dip. It was hard.
That, some of the things she did, she was doing them often for her attempt at survival, but they were clearly not good for a child.
Right. And she was a young mom. I mean, now I understand the whole, writing my story helped me understand the whole perspective, but it got worse before it got better.
Does that? It actually can help you put childhood wounds into an adult perspective, and you can have your adult self go back and almost reparent.
Right. That's kind of what happened
in you.
And so I want to hear
which made you a better mother.
that was one of my reasons for doing it. One of my big motivations for doing it was I wanted to parent my daughter from a healthy place. And I knew I wasn't going to. I was going to be doing it from this fake place. In fact, I have a story about my daughter walking down the mall with me, and she stopped and looked at me and she goes, "Mommy, people look at you funny." And I go, "What do you mean?" She goes, "They look at you like you're shiny." And I was like, oh my God, what she was seeing was my facade. And if my toddler could see this, I was so worried that she was going to grow up thinking that was normal. And
see, no, people look at you because you're beautiful.
That's not how I saw it.
We were in Venice on a
Okay,
gondola.
no, stop. Why don't you tell him that?
People would go,
stop.
"Oh, American Barbie."
Okay, that's not important.
That's why people look at you.
But that's not what
stunning.
I wanted. I didn't want her growing up thinking she had to have makeup all the time or hair done all the time. That if she wanted to be in sweats and no makeup, that was fine. I wanted her to value herself for more than her physical appearance, because I knew how painful it was when you lose that. So I felt like she was seeing the facade. And so whether that's what it was or not, it told me that I needed to change something.
All right. When we come back.
But before we come back, I want to hear from you. Your messages have been just so encouraging to me. This was a very scary journey for me to take. It was a painful journey for me to take. But hearing from you about your things that you went through growing up that you've been afraid to talk about up until now, that you haven't shared, or that, maybe you're finding the courage to finally share. I want to hear from you, please. So tag me.
Yeah. So did you learn anything? Please write it down. Take a picture of it. Hashtag Brain Warriors Way podcast. Also leave us a comment, question, or review at brainwarriorswaypodcast.com, and we'll enter you in to a drawing to win one of our books. Stay with us.
Welcome back. We are still talking about my journey through the relentless courage of a scared child. We are hopefully finding and touching on topics that relate to you and some of the things that you guys have dealt with growing up. I'm getting these messages. I love them. Keep them coming, please. And we left off with EMDR and when we were dating.
And it was sort of a perfect segue into about 4 months into our relationship.
I had no idea what I was getting myself into with you.
It's been the best time of your life.
It has, but it was.
I was
faced with a lot of personal work. Let's put it that way.
Pain, right? When children have growing pains, it's because they're going to be bigger. And
it's like working out in the gym.
And one of the early things that happened for us. So when I was writing The Brain in Love, it just had been very clear to me. If you want someone to fall in love with you, you want to do something special for someone they love.
But you probably should make sure they actually want you to do that for the person.
And so you got a call
from my sisters, my 2 half sisters. And they were freaked out because my dad had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. He was a recluse. He wouldn't come out of his room. He wasn't showering. He wasn't going to the grocery store. He was a mess. And I hadn't seen my dad. Now, because of my situation with him growing up, he had left when I was a baby. We did not have a good situation or a relationship growing up, even after he finally came back and decided he was going to become a Baptist minister. And that was very complicated. His journey with religion was complicated and complicated our relationship more. I'll leave it at that. But I write about it in the book. But it didn't make things better. Let me put it that way. Then he leaves the ministry and is again now doing drugs with my sister, one of my half sisters, and I just disconnected from him. And I finally had stopped being angry at him, but I also didn't have a relationship with him. I finally, along the way, was just like, I'm too tired to be angry with him anymore. I had disconnected from him, didn't talk to him for years. And then finally I was just like, I'm too exhausted to be angry, but I don't want him like in my life. And so then I get this call from my sisters that he is diagnosed with Alzheimer's and they need help. And I'm like, and what's your point? Not my monkey, not my circus. Like, he's never been there for me. It's not my job to be there for him. And that's really how I felt. Had just come out of a really awful divorce. I was finally dating my life was finally getting back on track. I was doing a lot of hard work with myself. I had a baby, a toddler, and that was not even close to like on my list of things to do, was taking a dad that had never been there for me.
Yeah. And for me, family's super important. I'm one of 7.
Your family's not like my family. Mine's like Jerry Springer. Yours is like Leave It to Beaver. So mine is like the Nightmare on Elm Street, actually.
And so with his diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, one of the reasons I got so excited about imaging is one of my very first cases was Matilda, who had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And SPECT is actually very good at distinguishing, is it Alzheimer's or vascular dementia or frontal temporal lobe dementia or pseudo dementia. And
yeah, but
Matilda
I didn't really care at that
had
time.
pseudo dementia. And when I put her on the right treatment for her brain, she got her memory back. And it's one of those dopamine, oh my God, incredible moments. I mean, it's sort of like the movie Awakenings.
Yeah.
And when you have that kind of experience as a doctor,
and power,
you remember it. And it just gave me all the chemicals of happiness. And so when I
loved what you did. I just didn't want to bring my dad into my life.
And so I said, well, you should bring him down and we should see him and at least let me work him up. And
I'm like, and where is he going to stay? And you're like, with you. And I'm like,
why not?
Yeah, no.
I didn't mean forever. I just meant, so we could work him up. Yeah, but that's not
what happened.
Well, keep going with the story. So I scan him. He doesn't have Alzheimer's disease. In fact, he's on a toxic combination of medication that I ended up pulling him off the medications. I mean, he had to stay so that I could work the plan. And
he had to stay. Let's repeat that. He had to stay. So it wasn't temporary. So you could work the plan, which means he lived with me. And yeah.
And what happened?
So here's the truth. It didn't just all of a sudden, our relationship didn't just all of a sudden get better, but we had time. We ended up with time. As his brain got better, we started having these opportunities to heal. And within months, he was actually, not only did he not have Alzheimer's disease, he had pseudodementia and he gets better. He loses 20 pounds. He starts teaching all day seminars at the church and leading Bible study in my house. And he starts getting sort of back into his ministry. And I'm like, I don't know if I trust this right now because I've never really trusted that with him. But he started, like, I really could see this sincerity probably for the first time, probably honestly for the first time ever. And so we started to have these opportunities to talk. And over time, now we also had a lot of hard times that we had to work through, but we had the opportunity to have those hard times to work through. And then fast forward, when we finally get married,
he became more independent.
More independent. And as we got married, we ended up helping him get a roommate. And then a few years later, he ends up passing away with, like a leukemia, like a blood disorder. Similar to leukemia, and nothing related to his brain. And he ends up moving back in with us. He was on hospice. And so we moved him back in with us at the end of his life. And so he ends up dying in my arms with me praying for him. But I had the opportunity to really work on all of that anger that I had with, all of those bad memories growing up, all the anger that I had with him. And I was able to completely forgive it. And he had a harder time forgiving himself than I had for forgiving him. I didn't realize how much he had been carrying, just regret for the way he had handled his life and how he'd been a dad. And so we were able to work through that. And it really was a gift. And that was when I really realized, it was the second time that I realized, okay, I was arguing with God again. And the first time was at the drug rehab center. And it's like, no, God was trying to give me this gift. And I kept trying to push it away. He was giving me this gift of healing. So
that was awesome.
So you're going to take the credit now, are you?
No. I'm going to take the credit for being who I am, which is
you're amazing,
wanting to be helpful. And when someone is suffering, it's just so easy to call people bad. When you grow up in trauma, it's easier. When you grow up in trauma, it's easier. And it's just harder to go why. But when you've seen tens of thousands, actually it's getting closer to hundreds of thousands of scans, it just softens your heart.
Mm-hmm.
And you just go, well, why was he like that? And which of the 4 circles that you and I always talk about were broken or
in his case,
help?
Pretty much all of them.
And his mother had suffered with severe depression.
Mm-hmm. And he was abused when he was young. And
yeah. And you got to meet your uncle.
Yeah. And so one of the gifts through that was that I didn't even know my dad. My dad didn't introduce me to his half brother or talk about him when I was growing up. I didn't really see my dad. He has this half brother that I didn't even know about. And when I met Bill ends up being like this amazing human who is so much like me.
Your real dad.
Yeah. I'm like, why wasn't he my dad? Like he literally was like, I'm like, we had so much in common.
He's
it was
like
crazy.
A 9th degree black belt.
He was like so into karate. I was super into karate. Like we just had so much in common. And I'm like, that was the weirdest thing. And it was right at the end of my dad's life that we connected. And it was like this last little gift that I got was like, oh, this person, like I'm so bonded to him. And we just like instantly bonded. And it was pretty amazing.
Yeah. So as he passes, you really get.
And my Aunt Patty too. Like
family.
Both of them are just amazing humans. And I just love them. Yeah.
So the help was for him.
Yeah. And the healing was for me.
Yeah. So what did you learn?
Has that ever happened to you where you had to take care of someone you resented and you didn't want to do it? And what happened? I would love to hear the story.
Write it down, what you learned. Post it on any of your social media sites. # Brain Warriors Way podcast and Tana Amen. And if you can relate, we'd love to read your story. Mm-hmm. Post it at brainwarriorswaypodcast.com. We'll enter you into a contest, to a raffle to win a copy of the Relentless Courage of a Scared Child. I hope you just give it away to so many of the people you know who struggle in relationships. That guess what? That's all of us. You guys have heard about the goat. No one is immune. Leave it to Beaver with a little bit of Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Seriously.
at least if you're.
I know. I always think of your family. Your family's so amazing. And then I heard that story, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, I don't feel quite so bad about my life now.
Stay with us.
If you're enjoying the Brain Warriors Way podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode. And while you're at it, feel free to give us a review or 5-star rating, as that helps others find the podcast.
If you're considering coming to Amen Clinics or trying some of the brain healthy supplements from BrainMD, you can use the code podcast10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com or a 10% discount on all supplements at brainmdhealth.com. For more information, give us a call at 855-978-1363.